Hello everyone, this is Jim Nix from nomadicpursuits.com, and in this video I'll be talking about exposure blending in Aurora HDR 2017. It's if you've heard the term, or you may be familiar with it, maybe you're not, but as the name implies, it's basically blending different parts of exposures to get to your final look. A lot of people, especially landscape photographers, they'll use this technique to achieve a very subtle look to their photos. And I think a lot of people, while if you're a Aurora HDR user, you may be a lover of HDR, maybe you like the HDR look, but there's plenty of people that don't like it, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean that they only shoot single exposures. They very well may go bracket their photos and then just take, let's say, the sky for one photo and merge it with the foreground of another photo. A lot of landscape people do that. You expose one for the sky, you expose one for the ground, you blend them together, and that's an exposure blend. To me, it's kind of like HDR. You're just not doing all the tone mapping and getting some of the sort of exaggerated results. Doesn't matter what you think or what you do. It's your photo, so do whatever you want with it. The point is, if I'm going to have a point here, and that is, you can do exposure blends in Aurora. It's quite simple and quite fun. So I've got this base HDR. It's a 3-exposure HDR shot in Italy. And so it's gone through tone map and all that, right? I can make adjustments if I want to, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my preset menu. I've got a preset I've built. In fact, I've built all these presets. I'll be talking about that pretty soon. But this preset I call Historic Landmarks. There you go. It's a little bit HDR looking, maybe a lot of it, depending on your opinion. But I like the look that it's applied to the photo, but depending on your taste, it might be a little overdone. So I'm going to show you how to blend some things together to sort of tone that down. And it's different than just dragging the opacity slider down to get a more subtle look. With an exposure blend, I think you can do some really neat things and create some really compelling images without creating an HDR kind of look. So here's what you do. I built the base layer, or Aurora built the base HDR. I added a preset, and that's where we are now. So I'm going to go go to the layers panel and open up a new layer, and I'm going to add the base, or excuse me, not the base HDR. I'm going to go grab the 0 exposure value frame from the bracket set, right? So that's the brightest of the 3, and it's going to lay on top. So this is one of the 3 exposures. Nothing's done to it. It's just the 0 exposure from the bracket set. I'm going to go get my brush, and I'm going to take my opacity all the way to the top. I'm going to take the brush size down a little bit, and all you do is you just paint it in, right? That's the beauty of Aurora. It makes this whole layers thing super easy, and you can create some really compelling images by stacking layers and doing different things. Maybe it's different presets on different layers or whatever it is. But let me show you my mask, and it's kind of sloppy. I'm not really doing a super clean job here, but when I'm doing videos, I'm always moving a little quick, so I'll clean it up a tiny bit. But the point is that I just masked in the sky from the 0 exposure from the bracket set on top of the HDR. So let me show you before. Yeah, now you can really see the difference in the sky, right? Very ugly sky, way overdone. And now I've got a nice clean sky because nothing's been done to the sky. It's an untouched sky from the 0 exposure photo. So in simple terms, that's an exposure blend. I have taken one of the exposures and blended in the sky. Now, you can do other things. I did a video a number of months ago about replacing a sky. You can just completely take a different sky. You would just add a new layer, choose a texture, basically, and instead of a texture, you could actually use a sky for the texture and paint in the new sky. It requires some detailed brush work depending on what the edges look like, but it can be done. I've done that, but in this case, I just wanted to blend in the original sky. Now that I have it in there, I could say, maybe I want to make it more blue and more pink and make it, more saturated or whatever it is. So I'm just making these adjustments to the sky. Let me show you before. Here we go. Come on, there we go. Very halo-y around the edges and kind of, just messy looking. And now, much prettier sky, I think. You could also, while you're at it, just add some denoise if you wanted to. Just say you wanted to soften up that look a little bit. If you had any bit of noise in the sky, you could just take it out, since basically you're just working in this area. But here's the other thing you can do. If you want to maybe soften up the entire look of the photo, while you're on this layer, you can come in here and let's say you take your opacity down to about, let's say 25, all right, and make the brush bigger. Remember, this layer is built on that 0 exposure value frame, right? That one there. So maybe you think it's a little too crunchy or crispy, whatever you want to call it. Maybe there's too much detail, too much HDR look in this photo for you. Well, I just took the brush, brush, not the eraser, and I dropped my opacity down, I increased the size, and I could just go brush at a 25% opacity level. I could just brush some of that 0 exposure frame on top of this one. So now let me show you. There's the mask. Of course, I missed some spots. But again, this is just kind of for fun. There we go. I've basically, at a 25% opacity level, just dropped some of that 0 exposure frame on top of the HDR base that has the preset. And, let me show you the before and after. There's the before, messy sky, which we replaced, and a little bit crunchier, a little more detailed sort of, cobblestones and architecture here. And now it's a bit softer. And so that's an alternative to when you're doing exposure blends. Maybe you can blend in the sky, for example, at 100% and then reduce the opacity and blend in the foreground, or in this case, I did the buildings as well at a lower opacity. So I think you end up with a very natural looking HDR. And we've certainly come a long way from the base tone map result, right? Which was that, and now we're here. I think very natural looking result. I think it's beautiful, frankly. But, depending on your taste, you might come in here and say, gosh, now I want to add another preset. And so I might come over here and, like I said, I've got a number of presets. Maybe I'll take this Angels Calling, reduced opacity, 20-something%, and just stick that on top to give it a little extra glow, a little extra pop of color. It's just something I love to do in Aurora. Certainly it's up to you to edit it how you please. But there's the photo where we were, and there's this layer with, I'm going to drop it maybe about closer to 20%. And it just gives it a nice subtle glow. I personally think that this now looks like a long single exposure and not an HDR at all. So it's an exposure blend with, so we got a preset on the base layer, preset on this layer too, and in between we blended in the sky at 100% from the 0 exposure from the bracket set, and then we blended in the rest of it at a reduced opacity, about 25%. And that's an exposure blend. Super quick, super easy, and I think results in very compelling looking images that don't have an HDR look. You can do it with all sorts of photos, doesn't matter. It's fun to experiment. It's a great technique. I highly recommend you try it. And that's it. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time, people. Adios.